Hi, my name's Ollie, and in this Politics Explained video, I'm going to go through everything you need to know about the presidential election process in Edexcel A-Level Politics. I'm going to start by looking at the parts of the specification this video covers before going into some key potential essay questions. Before then giving you an introduction to presidential elections, looking at the key processes of presidential elections, including the invisible primary, primaries and caucuses, the choice of running mate, national conventions, and the general election campaign, with loads of examples from recent presidential elections for each. Then I'm going to have a look at the Electoral College, and finally at the kind of advantages and disadvantages of the electoral process and Electoral College, and the debate around reform. The PDF you can see on your screen is part of an updated textbook on US government and politics for the Edexcel A-Level Politics Specification that you can purchase on the Politics Explained website, where you can also find loads of other resources to help you in your Politics A-Level, including detailed essay plans, updated textbooks for various different parts of the course, and a place to sign up for tutoring if that's something you're interested in. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. So starting off with the parts of the specification this video covers. So this is the first of 7 videos on the final chapter of the Government and Politics of the USA, part of the Edexcel course, and it looks at electoral systems in the USA, so looking at presidential elections and their significance, including the main processes to elect a president, the Electoral College, and the advantages and disadvantages of the electoral process and the Electoral College, and the debate about reform. In terms of the questions you could get asked on this, you could kind of be asked about kind of comparing elections between the US and the UK in terms of the 12 markers, as well as you could bring it into maybe questions about democracy. The questions on your screen aren't the only 12 markers that get asked, and there could be a range that also bring this in. And in terms of the 30 markers, again, a range of questions, but a key one is kind of whether the presidential election process requires reform, so the advantages and disadvantages are around it. You could also get asked more specific questions, potentially about the process, maybe about caucuses and the campaign. And it'll be useful in terms of more general questions about democracy in the United States as well. Yeah, let's start off by having a look at an introduction to the presidential elections, first looking at the timeline. So this timeline we're going to look at more detail, kind of going through each of these throughout the video, but first you have the invisible primary, and this is before the primary season begins, where potential candidates engaging in behind-the-scenes activities and kind of includes assessing viability, networking, fundraising, and securing the support of key party members and donors. During this stage, many candidates have publicly expressed their interests or intentions to run for the presidency, effectively commencing their informal campaigning. Then crucially, you have the primary elections, which are held between January and June, and these are state-level contests where party members vote for their preferred candidates, so this is both for the Democrats and the Republicans. It varies between primaries, some of which use secret ballots, primaries use secret ballots, and caucuses, which involve public gatherings. From there, once the candidate for each party has been selected, you have national conventions, where each major political party formally nominates their presidential and vice presidential candidates. This is a period for party unity, policy platform endorsement, and heightened public campaigning, where the party kind of comes together after effectively different candidates fight it out. So once the final candidate is decided, the party comes together to support their campaign. Then, of course, you have the general election campaigning, where they campaign across the country, both the Democrat and the Republican candidates, including public debates, policy speeches, and various appearances to garner widespread voter support. And then on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, voters cast their ballots in the general election for electors in the Electoral College, which is kind of the electoral system and how the president is chosen, who are pledged to specific candidates. The Electoral College electors then formally vote for the president and vice president based on how many of them are elected in each state, and a majority of 270 is required for any candidate to win the presidency. On the 6th of January, Congress counts the electoral votes and officially declares the election results, and the president is then inaugurated on the 20th of January, marking the beginning of their presidential term. To run for president, a candidate must meet certain constitutional requirements as set out in the Constitution. These are set out in Article 2 of the Constitution. They must be at least 35 years old, must be a natural-born citizen of the United States, so it excludes naturalized citizens who are born in other countries. The candidate must have been a resident in the US for at least 14 years, and this doesn't need to be continuous. And a person, crucially, cannot be elected to the office of president more than twice. So you can only run for re-election once if you've already been the president. In terms of the invisible primary, so the invisible primary is sometimes also known as a money primary, as it's pivotal but unofficial phases in the US presidential election cycle. So it's kind of unofficial because it comes before the official primary. This is characterized by several key activities and objectives crucial for shaping a candidate's campaign and public image. And this is crucially when we're talking about invisible primaries and primaries, these come before the general election campaign. And this is effectively in relation to, for both the Democrats and the Republicans, you have primary elections to decide who's going to be the selected candidate. So in terms of kind of key parts, you have early opinion polling into TV debates between different candidates for the Democrats or Republicans to kind of decide who would be the most effective. And polls provide crucial feedback on public perception, allowing candidates to tailor their strategies and messages, or potentially, if they realise they have very little support, to drop out of the race. Fundraising is really important to this stage. So a primary objective is to secure a strong financial base. So there's strong fundraising efforts, establishing connections with major donors, and forming relationships with political action committees. And financial strength is vital for sustaining a long-term campaign. Securing endorsements is also really important. If you can get key endorsements from key members of the party, that can bolster your standing in the party and your likelihood of being chosen by the voters. And crucially, it's also about establishing a public profile and policy platforms, putting forward the key things you'd like to do as a presidential candidate, differentiating yourself from the other presidential candidates, and adjusting these strategies based on feedback. So the invisible primary, whilst lacking direct voter participation of later stages, is a key battleground where candidates lay the groundwork for their campaigns, assess their viability, and position themselves for success in the upcoming primaries. The outcome of this phase often has lasting impacts on the trajectory of the presidential race. If we look at the invisible primary for the 2016 election, or the invisible primaries, because there's one on the Democratic side and one on the Republican side, as there wasn't an incumbent. In the Republican race, it was characterized by a large field and the very unexpected rise of Donald Trump, who used both media coverage to compensate for less fundraising compared to traditional candidates like Bush and Cruz. In the Democratic race, Hillary Clinton's early advantages positioned her as the presumptive nominee at this stage. But Bernie Sanders' grassroots campaign demonstrated the growing influence of small donors and positioned him as an effective challenge to Hillary Clinton. So in terms of the Republican primary, early frontrunners include quite establishment figures, with Jeb Bush and Ted Cruz emerging, both in terms of their level of fundraising and endorsements. So Jeb Bush raised substantial funds through his super PAC, the Right to Rise, reportedly amassing over $100 million. And Ted Cruz also raised over $50 million by July 2015. So you see in the dates here, this is at least a year before the eventual presidential election. So while Bush garnered significant endorsements due to his political legacy, Cruz focused on consolidating the conservative base and gained traction among grassroots supporters. But despite the fundraising success of these two figures, Trump's entry into the race dramatically changed the dynamics. He leveraged his celebrity status and media savvy to gain significant attention, eventually overtaking the early frontrunners in polls and media coverage. And TV debates were really crucial for this. He gained major attention and popularity during the debates by directly attacking the other candidates, being very controversial and setting out his populist approach and America First policy aims, which began to receive a lot of traction from the Republican base. And ultimately, as we go to the primary, we'll see that he was successful. In terms of the Democratic invisible primary in 2016, Hillary Clinton was largely dominant. She was a clear frontrunner with a well-established political network, significant fundraising capabilities, and widespread party support. By the end of the second quarter of 2015, her campaign had raised around $47 million. And Bernie Sanders, who was originally kind of viewed as a fringe candidate because he's a lot more left-wing than the other candidates, surprised many by raising approximately $15 million in the same period, largely from small donors. Clinton secured a large number of endorsements from key Democratic figures, but Bernie Sanders gained significant grassroots support and challenged her lead. His focus on small donations and progressive policies, much more left-wing policies, resonated with a substantial segment of the Democratic base, and it began to become clear that he would be the key challenger to Clinton. In terms of 2020, there was, of course, only an invisible primary and only a primary on the Democratic side because Donald Trump was running again and very easily secured the Republican nomination. There were no real challenges to him. But the 2020 Democratic primary, there were a wide array of candidates. So a field of 29 candidates with no clear early frontrunner. Candidates like Biden, Sanders, Warren, and Pete Buttigieg emerged as significant contenders. And Biden, despite being a prominent figure, faced initial fundraising challenges. And Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, who both of whom were more left wing than Biden, had strong fundraising performances and kind of quickly emerged as key challengers to Biden, who's more from the kind of centrist wing of the party. Biden eventually secured key endorsements from party figures, aiding his campaign's resurgence after early primary setbacks. And Pete Buttigieg, a relatively new figure on the national stage, having been more of a local politics figure, gained considerable attention and funding, highlighting the importance of media coverage and how actually the visible primary and the kind of especially the debates, TV debates within it, can allow kind of certain fringe candidates to gain a lot more popularity and media attention, and then therefore increase their chances of becoming the candidate. In terms of the 2024 election, of course, Biden secures a nomination on the Democratic side, so this is only the case in the Republican side. Donald Trump continued to be a central figure. So his presence, particularly on social media, far outpaced other candidates. And there are a couple of other candidates who challenged him. And crucially, it seemed at first like Ron DeSantis was going to be a really key challenger. So he was the Florida governor, kind of quickly emerged as a key challenger to Trump very on in the invisible primary, but then he was gradually superseded by Nikki Haley as the key challenger to Trump as time went on. Media coverage played a key role, with Senator Tim Scott and former Governor Chris Christie struggling due to garnering little media attention. So that's the invisible primary that obviously comes before the formal primaries, and where kind of candidates try to gain attention and position themselves as kind of an effective position once the primaries come around to potentially securing the nomination. Then the kind of more important side is primaries and caucuses, and this is once you get into the election year. So they serve as the official mechanisms where political parties select their nominees for the presidency. These events culminate in the national conventions, where the results from these state-level contests are formalised and the parties officially nominate their presidential candidates. During primaries and caucuses, party members vote for their preferred candidates, influencing the actions of delegates who will represent their preferences at the national conventions, which will eventually decide on the party's presidential candidate. These processes are crucial not only for determining the party nominee, but also for engaging party members in the democratic process in the election year for the first time, shaping party policies and setting the direction for the upcoming general election. In terms of the timeline, the primary season typically kicks off in February of the election year and can extend until June. The Iowa caucuses are really key, so they're the first kind of primary or caucus and set the tone for the race. They're closely watched as an early indicator of a candidate's national viability. Then you have the New Hampshire primary, which is the first primary in the nation, playing a significant role in gaining momentum. And then by the end of Super Tuesday, it's really clear who's likely to be the winning candidate. This is a key date in the primary calendar, when a large number of states hold their primaries or caucuses simultaneously, often in early March, and the outcomes on Super Tuesday can be a decisive factor in the emergence of the frontrunner. In terms of the different types of primaries, there are closed primaries, open primaries, semi-closed primaries, and caucuses. So closed primaries are restricted to party members, so it leads to a selection process where you have to be really appeal to the party's base, and these include Florida and New York. Open primaries, allow for a broader participation, including independents and sometimes members of the other party, therefore testing in a candidate's ability to vote to appeal to all voters. And semi-closed primaries offer a middle ground, permitting unaffiliated voters to participate in either party's primary, and this includes the important New Hampshire primary. Caucuses are typically organised by state parties and are local gatherings where members discuss candidates and select delegates. They're known for their community-orientated and participatory nature, with smaller turnouts of politically active voters. For example, the important Iowa caucus, which is the first caucus or primary. In terms of the differences between Republican and Democrat processes, the first is in delegate allocation. So Democrats predominantly use proportional representation, ensuring the allocation of delegates is reflective of the vote percentage received by each candidate, whereas Republicans vary by state, with some adopting proportional representation and others using a winner-takes-all approach. So for example, if we take the New Hampshire primary, if let's say in 2016, Hillary Clinton got 60% of the vote and Bernie Sanders got 40% of the vote, Hillary Clinton would get 60% of the delegates, and Bernie Sanders 40% of the delegates. And eventually, after all of the primaries and caucuses, the delegates kind of get tallied up, and the winner is the nominee. Whereas in the Republicans, if Trump got 60% and Cruz got 40%, for example, Trump would get all of the delegates in that state. Crucially, there are other key differences in Democratic primaries. There are also superdelegates. And they're party officials who can endorse any candidate regardless of primary outcomes. So you have all the delegates from the primaries, but we also have some of these superdelegates from the party, kind of key party officials who can decide who they want, rather than it being kind of based on voting. And that adds another layer of complexity to the nomination process. In terms of the advantages of primaries and caucuses, the first key one is there's democratic participation. So they involve the electorate directly in the political process, allowing voters to have a significant say in choosing their party's nominee. And this encourages a democratic culture within the party, offering a voice to its members. Crucially, they also test candidates. Candidates can demonstrate their ability to appeal across a wide range of demographics and regions, and therefore showcase their adaptability and appeal. Also, key policy discussion and testing, so these stages are crucial for debating and refining key policy ideas. Candidates present and argue over various policy proposals, offering voters a clear picture of where each kind of candidate stands on important issues. And crucially, it allows the voters to choose, of a party to choose between different factions of the party and different individuals to select the eventual nominee. In terms of disadvantages, it's a very lengthy and very costly process. So the duration of the primary season, often stretching for several months, can result in voter fatigue and lower engagement over time, whilst the high cost of campaigning across numerous states can mean that effectively only candidates who raise a lot of money have any chance of being selected as the presidential nominee. It crucially exposes internal divides within the party, especially during TV debates, where kind of effectively different candidates go at each other and argue why they should be the candidate, and that can be seen as damaging their own party in the eventual general election. It gives disproportionate power for certain states, so early primary states like Iowa and New Hampshire, as well as influential states like South Carolina, hold significant sway in the process due to their early scheduling. Their outcomes can heavily influence the momentum of campaigns, despite these states not necessarily representing the democratic diversity of the entire country. So if a candidate does very badly in the early races, they're likely to drop out, even if they may have done better in later races, because they've got very little chance of winning, and it kind of soon gets whittled down to a choice between two candidates in the later primaries. There's also been recent scandals. So the Iowa Democratic Caucus in 2020 faced significant challenges in vote tallying due to a malfunctioning mobile app, leading to questions about the reliability and integrity that the caucus provides. In terms of 2016 primaries, the Republican primary, there's a real crowded field of candidates coming from the invisible primary, with 17 major candidates vying for the nomination. In terms of the early contests, the Iowa caucus was won by Ted Cruz with 27% of the vote, with Trump following just behind and Marco Rubio at 23%. Trump secured a decisive victory, though, in the next primary, the New Hampshire primary, with 35% of the vote, and he solidified his frontrunner status by winning 7 out of the 11 states in Super Tuesday. Trump's campaign was marked by a mix of personal funding and smaller contributions. By the end of 2015, he'd loaned $12.6 million to his campaign and raised approximately $19 million. So he was eventually able to win, despite being significantly out-fundraised by Cruz, who raised $92 million, and Rubio $50 million. Trump ultimately clinched the nomination with 1,441 delegates, surpassing the required 1,237. In terms of the Democratic primary, the primary battle kind of very early on, it became clear it was between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, with the other candidates not gaining enough to have any chance of winning the nomination. In the Iowa caucus, it was a narrow win for Clinton with 49.9%, closely followed by Sanders at 49.6%. And in the New Hampshire, Sanders achieves a convincing win with 60.4% of the vote. Crucially, though, Clinton gained a significant lead on Super Tuesday, winning 7 out of the 11 states, showcasing her strength with diverse electorates. In terms of fundraising, her campaign was a fundraising powerhouse, generating over $250 million for the primary race. Well, Sanders' campaigns, notable for its grassroots support, raised over $228 million, predominantly from small donations. Clinton secured the nomination with 2,842 delegates, including superdelegates, surpassing the required 2,383. In 2020, the Republican primary, there wasn't really one, so Trump was the incumbent president, and the primary was largely uncontested, and he easily won victories in the early contests and eventual nomination. There's a diverse field in the Democratic primary with a wide array of candidates, including Biden, Sanders, Warren, and Buttigieg. In the Iowa caucus, the results were marred by reporting issues, with Buttigieg and Sanders nearly tied for the lead. In New Hampshire, Sanders won with Buttigieg close behind, so Biden really wasn't anywhere at this point. In Nevada, Sanders secured a strong victory, showcasing his popularity, but crucially, Biden won the South Carolina primary, reflecting his greater popularity with black voters. This revitalized his campaign and positioned him as the main contender against Sanders. Super Tuesday was a massive turnaround for Biden, who won 10 out of the 14 states, gaining a substantial delegate lead. Biden's campaign initially faced challenges, but gained momentum post South Carolina, showing his popularity among African American voters. Sanders' campaign was notable for its grassroots funding through small donations. And Biden also benefited from other candidates dropping out, including Buttigieg and Warren, and endorsing his candidacy. Biden ultimately secured the Democratic nomination, benefiting from consolidating moderate votes and endorsements from former rivals. In 2024, the Democratic primary was largely uncontested, with no challenger to Biden, and the president easily winning the nomination. In the Republican primary, DeSantis emerged as a powerful early challenger, but Nikki Haley grew in popularity as DeSantis gradually lost support. And in the end, the 2024 primary was kind of between Haley and Trump, but Trump easily won victory, with Haley only winning one of the primaries and Trump winning all of the easy early ones, and I think all but one on Super Tuesday. The next key part of the presidential election process is the choice of running mate. So around a week before the party's national convention, once the candidate has been selected, they must announce their running mate, who will become vice president if they win the election. The timing is often used to generate momentum and boost polling numbers, and the chosen running mate is often confirmed at the party's national convention, which is used as a platform to showcase the ticket to the party supporters and the wider electorate. There are a range of factors taken into account when choosing a running mate. A balanced ticket is really important, so candidates often select a running mate who can balance the ticket in terms of geography, demographics, experience, or ideology, and this is aimed to kind of reach out to a broader voter base. So aiming for balance, Biden chose Harris to complement his profile. She brought diversity as a woman of colour, and her prosecutorial background contrasted with his legislative experience. Party unity is also really important, and seeking to unify different factions of the party. So often running mates are chosen to bridge divides within the party. So in 2016, Hillary Clinton chose Tim Kaine. It seems a safe choice to appeal to moderates and unify the party. And competence is also really important. So Donald Trump in 2016 chose Mike Pence, who was more of an establishment Republican figure, and someone who had executive and legislative experience, complementing Trump's outsider status. Perhaps the most important, though, is electoral appeal. And factors like the running mate's popularity in key swing states, appeal to certain voter demographics, and previous electoral experience and play a significant role. Biden's selection of Harris was also seen as a move to solidify his support among women and African American voters, whilst Trump's selection of Pence was partly to solidify Trump support among evangelical voters, which Pence was very popular with. So the next key thing to look at is the national conventions. So they're pivotal events in the US presidential election cycle where political parties nominate their presidential and vice presidential candidates officially, and these finalise and confirm the ticket following the primary and caucus season. They serve as platforms for parties to unite, showcase their candidates, and set the tone for the general election campaign. And traditionally, the party holding the presidency holds its convention second. The key purposes are to officially nominate candidates, adopt the party's platform, so they're kind of pivotal in shaping and adopting the party's platform, which is a comprehensive document that outlines the party's policies, goals, and specific principles. It's made up of individual planks, each detailing a stance on specific issues. In 2020, the Democratic platform adopted a kind of comprehensive platform that included a range of policies from healthcare reform to addressing climate change. The Republican Party, in a break from tradition, decided not to adopt a new platform and instead expressed continued support for Trump's agenda. They serve as a key rallying point for party unity, aiming to unify different factions in the party after they kind of been fighting against each other in the primary process. And the Democratic National Convention in 2020 features speakers from across the party spectrum, including progressive Bernie Sanders, who had been the key opponent of Biden, and moderates like John Kasich, aiming to showcase party unity. Whilst they can also showcase key figures and rising stars in the party. So they often include speeches from prominent party members, but also for potential future leaders to gain national visibility, potentially set them up for future years. So in 2020, there were kind of key party figures such as Obama, but also rising stars like Stacey Abrams, whilst the Republican convention mainly features speeches from prominent Republicans and, crucially, a lot of members from the Trump family. In terms of setting tone for the general election, they also mark the transition from the primary season to the general election campaign, and a tone where it becomes a Democratic versus Republican election and fight, rather than kind of previously or up to now when it was all about, okay, who's each party going to select within the party, and that was the key focus. Then they go on to the general election campaign, which officially begins after the national conventions, typically held in the summer, and runs until election day in November. The campaign intensifies 9 weeks before the election post-Labor Day, which is the first Monday of September, recognise these as the unofficial start of the intense election season. This is marked by intense campaigning across the nation with a focus on key swing states. The general election is on the Tuesday after the first Monday of November, and early postal voting is available in 20 states. This is a key point of contention in the 2020 election. In 2016, the turnout was 55%. Whereas in 2020, it was significantly increased to 62%. This was influenced partly by the fact that each party was able to mobilise its base a lot more, with it seen as a really critical election for deciding the country's future, especially as it was whether Trump was going to be elected for a second term, but also because of COVID, there was greater use of mail-in ballots, which enabled greater voting. Key aspects of the campaign include the media, which plays a crucial role in shaping public perception. So candidates use television ads, social media, and press appearances to convey their messages, respond to opponents, and engage with voters. In the 2020 election, both Biden and Trump heavily utilised digital platforms, especially due to COVID-19. There are also often town halls and rallies, ranging from large-scale rallies to smaller, more intimate town hall meetings, and these give candidates opportunities to connect directly with voters and mobilise support. In the run-up to the 2016 election, Trump used large-scale rallies really effectively to build support, mobilise his base, and attract attention. And also crucial aspects of the campaign are the presidential debates, which are high-stakes events that can significantly impact their campaign. They provide a platform for candidates to outline their policies, challenge their opponent, and showcase their suitability for the presidency. In the 2020 election, it featured 3 presidential debates between Biden and Trump, which were key moments in the campaign. And Biden's performance in debates was a particular focus due to his age, and his performance abated some fears of voters about his age and potential impairment. Swing states are highly important in the general election campaign due to their potential to vote for either major political party. And this lies in their ability to tip the balance in the Electoral College. As such, they're often the focal point of election campaigning and strategies. They're closely watched on election night for early indications of the likely outcome. And parties dedicate significant resources to win over undecided voters through targeted advertising, rallies, and ground campaigns. In the 2016 election, swing states played a really pivotal role. So states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, traditionally leaning Democratic, swung in favour of Donald Trump, which are key to his victory. And this was in large part due to his appeal to working class and non-college educated voters in these states. In the 2020 election, Biden managed to reclaim these key states, and he additionally won in Arizona and Georgia, which had traditionally been Republican states, and this was crucial to securing his victory and showing actually the evolving nature of the political landscape in these states. I've got here is a key list of the kind of safe Democratic states, swing states, and safe Republican states. So the vast majority of campaigning is done in these swing states, sometimes also known as purple states. Some of the classic ones like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, but there's also been some that have been added. So Texas, Arizona has recently become a swing state. Florida's always been quite an important swing state, but these are the ones to look out for on election day. What we're going to look at now is the Electoral College, which is a distinctive feature of the US presidential election process established by the Constitution to determine the winner of the presidency. So similar to kind of first past the post in the UK, which eventually determines the winner of the Electoral College, is the process they use in the US, and in a way it's quite similar, has a lot of similarities to first past the post. It was originally intended as a compromise between electing the president by a vote in Congress and election by a popular vote of qualified citizens. This unique mechanism reflects the Founding Fathers' intention to balance the will of the populace with the interests of states in a federal system, and this very crucially shows how it can be seen as, in some ways, undemocratic. So the Electoral College consists of 538 electors, corresponding to the number of US senators and representatives, plus 3 from the District of Columbia. Each state is allocated a number of electors equal to its total number of senators and representatives in Congress, thereby varying by state size. So a state like California, which has a lot more members in Congress, a lot of senators and representatives based on its population, has a lot more electors and a lot more influence on the outcome than Alaska, which is a lot smaller state with a smaller population and therefore fewer senators and members in the House of Representatives. During presidential elections, voters in each state actually vote for the electors pledged to support a particular candidate rather than the candidate themselves. And this means that the popular vote in each state determines which electors are chosen. A candidate needs a majority of electoral votes, so at least 270 out of 538 to win the presidency. And most states operate on a winner-takes-all basis, meaning that the candidate who wins a popular vote in that state earns all of its electoral votes. For example, in 2016 and 2020, Trump won all of Florida's 29 electoral votes by winning the state's popular vote, even if he just won that popular vote. However, Maine and Nebraska are the exceptions, using a proportional system to allocate their electoral votes based on the popular vote distribution. Each state decides its own rules on various aspects of voting, including postal voting, absentee voting, and prisoner voting. In Maine and Vermont, prisoners never lose their right to vote, even while they're incarcerated, whilst in others, including Hawaii and Illinois, prisoners lose their vote whilst incarcerated. In Florida, interestingly, those who are convicted of crime also lose their vote, including Donald Trump in his own election in 2024. Oregon is known for its mail-in voting system, which is one of the most expansive in the country. Since 1998, all elections in Oregon have been conducted entirely by mail. Every registered vote receives a ballot in the mail weeks before Election Day, whereas New York has more traditional and restrictive absentee voting policies. Historically, to be able to vote by absentee ballot in New York, voters have to have a specific reason, such as being absent from the country on Election Day, illness, or disability. In terms of counting and determining the result, after the election, the chosen electors meet in their respective states to cast their votes for the president and vice president. These votes are then sent to Congress, where they're officially counted in a joint session in January following the election. For example, so in Florida, in 2016 and 2020, the 29 Florida electors would win and all pledged their vote for Donald Trump because they got a majority. He got a majority in Florida, and it takes a winner-takes-all system. Rogue or faithless electors who vote for contrary to who kind of the popular vote in their state voted for do exist. And in 2016, there were seven faithless electors, with some casting their votes for candidates like Colin Powell and Bernie Sanders instead of the pledged candidates. In 2020, though, there were no such instances, reflecting tighter state laws binding electors' votes. After being counted by the vice president, the next president and vice president is announced. If there is no majority, which I think has only ever happened once, the Senate chooses the vice president and the House chooses the president. And that's if there is a tie in Electoral College votes. What we're going to look at now is a number of key case studies. So the 2000 US presidential election is one of the most contentious and closely fought elections in American history, marked by a legal battle over the vote count in Florida and a decision by the Supreme Court that ultimately determined the outcome. So the election was between George W. Bush and Democrat Al Gore. The initial vote count showed Bush narrowly leading in Florida, a crucial swing state necessary for a majority in the Electoral College. The margin was so slim that it triggered an automatic recount under the state's laws. The recount process in Florida became mired in controversy, with disputes over ballot design and the validity of certain ballots, such as what were known as hanging chads, where the voters' intent was unclear. Ultimately, Florida's recount outcome was pivotal, as it would determine who would reach the necessary 270 electoral votes. At stake were, at the time, Florida had 25 electoral votes based on its population, which would push either candidate over the top to win. The legal battle over the recount eventually reached the Supreme Court in the case of Bush vs. Gore, and the central arguments revolved around equal protection and the consistent standards in the recount process. On December the 12th, the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, effectively halted the recount. The court held that the varying standards of the recount process in different counties violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, and this meant that the original certification of Florida's vote by the Florida Secretary of State stood, awarding the state's Electoral College votes to Bush and thus securing his victory in the election. It highlighted the complexity of the Electoral College system and raised significant questions about voting processes and election integrity. The Supreme Court's ruling, whether it should have had the power to make the decision as an unelected body, remains a subject of debate. In the 2016 presidential election, it was marked by its unexpected outcome and political ramifications. It stands alone as one of the most notable elections in recent history, where Republican Donald Trump won the presidency against Hillary Clinton despite losing the popular vote. So Trump secured the presidency by winning 304 Electoral College votes compared to Clinton's 227, surpassing the 270 threshold needed to win. The outcome was largely influenced by Trump's victories in key swing states such as Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and these states, traditionally Democratic strongholds, shifted in favor of Trump, significantly contributing to his victory. Despite his Electoral College win, Clinton actually won the popular vote, garnering nearly 2.9 million more votes than Trump, and the discrepancy between the Electoral College result and the popular vote became a central point of discussion post-election. On the Trump and Republican side, it was celebrated as a significant political upset and repudiation of the political establishment. They argued that his victory underscored the effectiveness of the Electoral College in balancing the interests of different regions across the country. Clinton supporters expressed dismay at the election outcome, particularly the dissonance between the popular vote and the Electoral College result. They argued that the election highlighted the fundamental issue with the Electoral College system, questioning its fairness and representativeness in reflecting popular will. The result intensified calls for reforming or abolishing the Electoral College, with advocates citing the need for a system where every vote carries equal weight regardless of the state. In 2020, again, it was a highly contentious and polarising event marked by the COVID-19 pandemic, widespread use of mail-in voting, and unprecedented post-election challenges that threatened democracy in the US. Biden won the presidency with 306 Electoral College votes, whilst Trump got 232. And his victory is cemented by key wins in battleground states such as Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, which had voted for Trump in 2016. The election saw a record turnout, partly due to the extensive use of mail-in voting as a safe alternative during the pandemic, and Biden won the popular vote by over 7 million votes. Following the election, Trump and his allies launched a series of legal challenges in multiple states, contesting the results and making unsubstantiated claims of widespread voter fraud, particularly focusing on mail-in voting processes. Despite numerous court cases and recounts, no evidence was found to support these claims, and the Republican and Trump challenge failed in every single court case. However, these challenges fueled widespread misinformation and contributed to a heated political climate. Trump wasn't prepared to accept that he'd lost or to leave office and tried every way possible to overturn the election result. On January 6th, as Congress convened to certify the Electoral College results, a violent mob stormed the US Capitol in an attempt to overturn the election results, incited by Trump's false claims of a stolen election. The event marked a shocking and unprecedented attack on US democracy, and Vice President Pence, who presided over the certification process, resisted intense pressure from Trump and some Republican members of Congress to overturn the results. Pence upheld his constitutional duty to certify the results and was vilified by some Trump supporters as a result. Despite the riot and ongoing objections from some Republican members of Congress, many of whom refused to certify the election result, the certification process was completed and Biden's victory was formally affirmed. The 2020 election really shows the deep divisions within American society and the challenges of maintaining democratic norms and institutions in a highly polarised political environment. What we're going to have a look at now is the advantages and disadvantages of the electoral process and the Electoral College, as well as the debate around reform. In terms of arguments for the Electoral College, it can be argued that it balances the interests of smaller states. So it gives smaller states more influence in their population size, which suggests in a direct election system. So states like Wyoming and Vermont have a greater per capita influence than in the Electoral College than larger states like California and Texas. And that's because even if their population might be only say there's 536 electors, and say their population might be less than 1 out of 536 of the total of the US population, they'll still get at least 3 electors because it reflects the fact they have 2 senators and 1 member of the House of Representatives. And this can be seen as a positive thing because it shows candidates pay attention to less populous regions, balancing the interests of the entire country and giving attention to the particular identity of each state. It can be seen as a check against the tyranny of majority and protecting federalism and the interests of smaller states in the United States as the Founding Fathers intended. It can also be seen as a positive because it promotes a two-party system and creates a clear winner. By requiring a majority of electoral votes to win, the Electoral College fosters a stable two-party system, as voters know that if they don't vote for one of the 2 main parties, the other is likely to win in their state, and their vote is unlikely to influence the outcome. This discourages extreme political fragmentation seen in some countries, and the dominance of the Democratic and Republican parties can be attributed in large part to the Electoral College. The fact that almost all states use a winner-takes-all system to decide how to distribute their Electoral College votes means that third-party candidates have no chance, as they're highly unlikely to win any state. And it also means the Electoral College produces a clear winner, even if no candidate has majority support from the population, as they can win a majority of the electoral seats by having a plurality of votes in enough states. For example, 40% of the vote in a state may win if no other candidate has got more votes. So say Trump got 42%, Biden got 35%, and the Green candidate got 20%. Trump would be the clear winner and get the Electoral College votes from that state. For example, independent Ross Perot got 19% of the vote across the country in the 1992 election, but this translated to 0 Electoral College votes. Clinton won with 370 of the 538 electors, despite getting just 43% of the vote. There's very rarely a strong third-party candidate, so in 2016 the Republicans and Democrats shared 94.3% of the vote, while in 2020 they shared over 98% of the vote. Another key advantage is that candidates must appeal to the whole country. So the Electoral College discourages candidates from focusing solely on regional issues or appealing only to voters in their region. A candidate must appeal to a diverse range of states and regions to win, as demonstrated by campaigns that traverse the country rather than concentrating on a single area. Obama's victory in 2008 was partly due to his campaign's successful outreach in states like North Carolina and Virginia, states that had not voted Democrat in presidential elections for decades. And in 2020, Biden's campaign strategy included focusing on rebuilding the blue wall in the Midwest, particularly in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, which has swung to Trump in 2016. And this approach, coupled with efforts to appeal to voters in traditionally Republican states like Georgia and Arizona, which were becoming swing states where he ultimately won, highlighted the importance of appealing to a diverse range of states to secure victory in the Electoral College. On the other hand, there's a number of arguments against the Electoral College. Crucially, it can be argued to be highly undemocratic and an outdated system that has clear problems and undermines modern democracy in the United States. One key disadvantage cited by critics is that the Electoral College leads to disproportionate focus on a few swing states, neglecting the interests of voters in states with a solid majority for one party. The around 11 swing states receive far more campaign attention and resources than solidly red or blue states, where the candidates feel like they've either already lost or already won and their campaigning isn't really going to matter. The 2016 presidential election saw an intense focus on states like Pennsylvania and Michigan, with campaigns dedicating significant time and resources there, while reliably blue or red states like New York or Alabama received considerably less attention. In 2020, a significant focus on swing states was evident in both campaign events and TV ad spending. So out of the 212 general election campaign events held by the major party candidates from late August to early November, 96% occurred in just 12 states. Pennsylvania and Florida alone hosted over a third of these events as key swing states. And additionally, a vast majority of TV ad spending, around 88%, was concentrated in just 6 states. And this pattern highlights the Electoral College's influence on campaign strategies, driving candidates to concentrate their efforts in a limited number of battleground states. Crucially, there's a mismatch between popular vote and the electoral outcome in some key elections. So it can result, the Electoral College, in a candidate winning the presidency without winning the popular vote, as happened in 2000 with George W. Bush and in 2016 with Donald Trump. Bush lost the popular vote by roughly 540,000 votes, whilst Trump lost the popular vote by over 2.87 million votes in 2016, but still became president. This crucially raises key questions about the democratic legitimacy of the election outcome and how the Electoral College undermines democracy in the UK. There's also a key risk of faithless electors. So the system allows for the possibility of electors who don't vote for the candidate who they're pledged to. While rare, they can potentially alter the outcome of an election, as seen in 2016 when there were 7 faithless electors. They didn't actually influence the outcome, but there were 7 faithless electors in 2016, which could erode public trust in democracy and the electoral process. The 2016 election underscored the risks associated with depending on individuals such as electors and members of Congress to certify a result, as demonstrated by this fact that a significant number of House Republicans, of course not enough for a majority, but they voted against certifying the election results despite no real evidence of electoral fraud. This was just to kind of secure support from the party base, many of whom believed Trump's false accusations. So though there were no faithless electors in 2020, this highlights how the Electoral College can become a focal point for contesting election outcomes, potentially undermining the democratic process and public confidence in election integrity. It can be argued that it would be a lot more simple and it makes a lot of sense if just there was a popular vote across the country and the winner won the election and became president. And finally, it can be seen as undermining the principle of equal representation. So critics argue that the Electoral College undermines the principle of one person, one vote, as the weight of a vote can vary significantly between states based on the size of the state. So voters in smaller states have more of a say, as they get a bare minimum of 3 Electoral College votes based on having 2 senators and 1 member of the House. For instance, a vote in Wyoming carries more weight in the Electoral College than a vote in California, leading to unequal representation in presidential elections. California is over 60 times bigger than Wyoming in population, but only receives 18 times more Electoral College votes. Votes in swing states, crucially, are also far more important than votes in safe seats. We're going to have a look at, finally, is the difficulty of reform. So the Electoral College could be reformed to ensure that the winner of the popular vote becomes the president. So it could be a kind of a direct popular vote system, where the winner, the candidate with the most votes nationwide, would win the presidency automatically, directly reflecting the will of the electorate and ensuring every vote carries equal weight and removing the possibility of the wrong candidate winning. This would simplify the electoral process by eliminating the confusion and complexity of the Electoral College, where the winner-takes-all approach in most states can disproportionately impact the final outcome. However, reform is highly unlikely. The current Electoral College benefits the Republican Party, so they would block reform. It's benefited from the current electoral structure in 2000 and 2016, when Republican candidates became president despite losing the popular vote. And consequently, the party has a vested interest in maintaining the status quo, and any attempts to reform the Electoral College is likely to face staunch opposition from Republican lawmakers in Congress. And of course, as we know, it would require a constitutional amendment which requires 2/3 of both the House of Representatives and the Senate, and the Republicans would easily be able to block that. Reforming the Electoral College would also, as I said, necessitate a constitutional amendment, and this would also crucially be blocked by the states. So smaller states, which currently benefit from disproportionate representation in the Electoral College, are likely to oppose such an amendment. These states fear losing influence in presidential elections, as a direct popular vote would shift focus towards more populous areas, reflecting the political leverage smaller states currently enjoy. It would also likely be opposed by swing states, who receive disproportionate focus and money during elections, including the promises of funding to address local problems in order to try and secure their votes. And this funding and focus would dry up under a direct popular vote system. And finally, it would be presented as threatening federalism. Reforming the Electoral College is often seen as a threat to federalism, the system that balances power between the national and state governments. Proponents of the current system argue that it preserves the unique role of states in the presidential election process and ensures a distribution of power that respects state sovereignty in the US. And opponents of reform contend that moving to a national popular vote system would undermine this federalist principle, centralising electoral power and diminishing the voice of individual states in the presidential election process. So yeah, that was a pretty long video, but that was everything you need to know about the presidential election process in Edexcel A-Level Politics in the US part of the course. Let me know if you've got any comments or questions in the comment section below, and I'll get back to you. And I'll be back with 5 more videos on the US democracy and participation. Well, 6 more videos on the US democracy and participation part of the course.